Hello and welcome to our election special at Boo. We're calling it US Elections Simplified. All through the series, we've focused on the basics, and right now we're focusing on what a Joe Biden and Kamala Harris presidency and vice presidency is going to look like for the world. And joining us is Maya Mirchandani, a senior fellow at ORF and an assistant professor at Ashoka University. She teaches media studies. She's also a journalist of several years and has covered elections from the United States as well. Maya, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much for having me again.
Our pleasure. What have been your off-the-cuff reactions in the last 12 to 24 hours? We've seen a completely elongated kind of counting scene for the last 4 days, and finally now it's pretty clear that it's Biden and a Harris ticket. And of course, there's a lot of question on what it means for the United States, but also for the rest of the world.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, I think the one thing, of course, everybody has their eye on is that there has been no reaction from Donald Trump yet to this. And, he had Rudy Giuliani come out and make some claims about who gets to call the elections. And it's the courts that get to call the elections. That isn't actually the case. I mean, in the United States, it's the election officials, county by county, who declare the results, and then they go into the networks, and the networks call the elections. And even Fox and Breitbart called it for Joe Biden and called him president-elect. So even though Associated Press was the first one to call it, after which CNN, etc., went on, everyone was waiting to see what Fox would do. And once that happened, it was pretty clear. But Trump himself has not come out. So I think that was the first thing, that is he going to speak? Is he going to say anything? The second instinctive response was that you could almost feel, speaking to people in the United States, certainly those in big cities, or seeing the pictures coming in, that there was this sort of, the lid had been taken off a pressure cooker and the steam was kind of coming out, because the last few days had been really tense, because of this, the count that extended, and Trump's coming out to say, stop the count, or this is a fraud. And I think we'd seen early on that he had been trying to discredit the mail-in ballot, precisely because everyone had predicted that it would heavily lean Democrat, because they were the ones more concerned about precautions with COVID and things like that. But I think, I'm sort of listening to what Kamala Harris and Joe Biden have said after their acceptance speeches, which is about leading a country out of sort of a sense of despair and grief into decency, into inclusion, into hope. And that's a strong message for the rest of the world as well, because at the end of the day, when America is divided and you have an American president who was unpredictable in the way he communicated with the rest of the world, walking out of international alliances, being dismissive of friends and allies, some of that civility will probably come back. But I think more importantly, it's for the United States. It's an important time for them to understand what exactly happened, because, I mean, in terms of percentages, Joe Biden has won over 4 million of the popular vote, but there's a huge population that actually, continued to vote for him in spite of what happened in the last 4 years. So I think that's a community that Biden's White House is going to have to kind of engage with.
Right.
Yeah, but I think it tells me a lot about changing American demographics. I think that's really been the interesting side story of this election.
Yeah, we'll get to that. I mean, I just want to bring up, political commentator Van Jones. He put this on CNN.
Yeah.
He very famously burst into tears, and he said it's easier now to be a father. It's easier to tell your kids that character matters, that the truth matters. It's easier for a whole lot of people. He spoke about Muslims. He spoke about immigrants, black people, brown people. So symbolically, it's different, and symbolism goes a long way when you're talking about the U.S. president.
That's right. And I think, Van Jones, it was actually both heartbreaking and heartwarming to see, like the analogy I made about the steam being let out. I think his outburst, his emotional outburst was, in a sense, that pressure cooker kind of letting off the steam. But he made that comment about how I can't breathe wasn't only about George Floyd. It was about all these various communities, including so many of us in our extended families living in the United States, who said to me about a month ago, the air is rancid with hate. I don't know if I'm safe because of the color of my skin. And I think the fact that our own families, in spite of what Indian Americans were being projected as being sort of Republican or Trump supporters, were feeling was real. And the fact is that the Republican Party under Trump, or Trump's Republican Party, perhaps that's a better way of saying it, was feeding on this sense of white grievance, the poor white American, the industrial, agricultural, rural white American who had been kept on the margins of American progress, or felt that they had been kept on the margins of American progress. And tapping into that sense of fear. We see that model replicated by populist leaders around the world. They take a sense of economic grievance and unemployment and that kind of marginalization and convert that into a culture war, which you need to win in order to preserve your own future. And the immigrant, the African American, the Hispanic, the Muslim became the enemy of that community of white Americans. I think the fact that that community is, in a sense, saying as well today that, we still are out there, we still want to be heard, is something that Joe Biden is going to have to take into account going forward.
Yeah.
Because while they've made gains in the Senate, while they've, Trump has given the Republican Party the Supreme Court. That's been their biggest victory in the last 4 years. 6 judges on the U.S. Supreme Court are Republican, 3 are Democrat. And I think for them to say that we got what we wanted out of the Trump White House, now we can carry on with the rest of our work, is an indication that they are also not sure about this politics of grievance that Trump is trying to feed. But that politics of grievance remains, because if you look at the vote percentages, even though Biden has this 4 million popular vote lead, that lead comes from urban, immigrant, African American, liberal white people in big cities. It doesn't come from this other base of Trump's. And I think that's going to be the fault line in America, that even Biden is going to have to take into account.
Yes. So Trump may be gone, but Trumpism is here to stay. In other words,
At least for the near future. And I think it'll be up to the Republican Party in America to be able to tread that ground. I don't think Biden, as the Democrat president, can do it. I think it'll have to be Senate Republicans who are going to have to deal with Trumpism, because it actually then, are they going to swing even further right? Or I don't know. I mean, I think that this will play out over the next 4 years.
yeah. We'll of course be watching. One final question, Maya. There was this hilarious piece in The Guardian written by the satirist and writer Mohammed Hanif. And for viewers who are not familiar with that piece, just to recap what he said it was kind of funny, of course. He said Donald Trump has been not a very good president, to put it mildly, for the United States and for the citizens of the United States. But for the rest of the world, who have been bearing the brunt of American presidency and their policy with often disastrous consequences, it's going to be more of the same. So it's a cynical piece, but I just wanted to bring that up to set up my question, which is, what do you think a Biden presidency is going to be like for the rest of the world?
Well, I think in terms of Biden's foreign policy, I suspect that he's going to have a lot on his plate as far as rebuilding America's relationship with European partners, with Canada, with Mexico are concerned. I think those will be, because those have traditionally been American friends and allies. I mean, they're allies from World War II, onwards. And I think that, to me, the fact that Trump sort of grated on the European leadership or the Canadian leadership with Justin Trudeau, or the way he treated Mexican immigrants, these things have had an impact. And I think they are looking to Biden to kind of heal that. I also think that Trump's decision to walk out of multilateral arrangements and multilateral agreements, which gave other populists some reason to celebrate, that if the Americans don't need to why do we need to? I think Biden is going to try and reverse some of that. I think if you're asking me, what about India and what about, how do countries like India deal with? I think Hanif is right to some extent that, you know, the Americans might have been alarmed by, or some Americans might have been alarmed by the way Trump conducted himself as a diplomat in the most undiplomatic fashion. But it really didn't change things on the ground for Afghanistan or India or Pakistan or any of us. Um, but so there is truth that there will be some level of continuity. But I think what will be different if Biden goes back towards sort of the values of liberal democracies and multilateralism is some of the more bristly topics that the Democrats did bring up, even if that's hypocritical in from the internal American politics perspective, of religious freedom, of liberal democratic values, of the protection of minorities, of human rights violations in other parts of the world, of the need for democracy. I think India will have to kind of also watch to see where those comments will be. In fact, I mean, Kamala Harris herself and Pramila Jayapal were moving, questions on Kashmir in the U.S. Congress in the not so distant past. We saw our own Foreign Minister S. Jaishankar refuse to meet a House Foreign Affairs committee because Pramila Jayapal was on that committee for having raised questions on Kashmir. So I think for all other countries and governments who thought that they were no longer answerable to the democratic principle because Trump gave them cover, I think that situation is a little more tenuous today.
Yes, and we will, of course, continue to be waiting and watching and seeing how this has ripple effects across the world. Thanks so much for joining us, Maya.
Thanks a lot. Thanks for having me.